Hello and welcome to another episode of This Much is True Crime with myself, Martin Frizzell, and Emeritus Professor of Criminology, who looks like he's lost a little bit if you're watching this on YouTube, Professor David Wilson. What's happened?
Well, new Turkish barber, misunderstood. I like this quite short with shaved. And so he kind of shaved off this part, leaving me with a goatee. My wife voted immediately that it all had to go and I had to start again. So this is the first time since COVID I've not had a beard, and I'm feeling really exposed. So that's why there is a different look on this particular podcast.
Do you think this will make any difference to the Mail Online's suggestion or description of you as Britain's hot criminologist? Do you think that might sway it now? I mean, I think you look a bit younger.
Well, this is so kind, and I believe it was the Mail that described me as that. Although, let's be honest, I've also been described as the thinking woman's Alan Titchmarsh, so I'm never quite convinced which of those labels I prefer. Um, but this will hopefully in a week's time, 2 weeks' time, next time we do the podcast, there'll be a bit more beard. And of course, there's news about the podcast, isn't there? Because the viewer, the
Yeah.
listener might hear stuff.
Yeah. Apologies if you are getting adverts, but we just started to do that, and it's not to send us off to the Maldives for a long break on a holiday or anything like that. It's literally just to pay for a bit of the technology that we use. It does cost a bit of money, not much, literally a few pennies, but it just helps if we know that something's coming back in. So once again, not everyone loves adverts, but they can make the world go round, and you will get to the main meat of what we're talking about within a few seconds, literally. And today, actually talking of meat, today,
What a link.
as we're recording this, there you go. As we're recording this, in Australia, it's the latest installment of the Beef Wellington murder, which, of course, 50-year-old Erin Patterson was found guilty of the murder of three of her in-laws and the attempted murder of a fourth person. But now, as she waits for her sentencing, which will be in a couple of weeks' time or so, the authorities down there are starting to reveal a bit more about the case and what they didn't say and what they didn't let the jury know during the long, long trial of Erin Patterson. And this relates to her husband, Simon, who it turns out had three near-death experiences from the same woman's cooking.
It's extraordinary. And I also got slightly confused. And, this is your side of the pod, isn't it, Martin? Because I was aware that he had alleged that she had tried to kill him on three other occasions. And I wondered if that had something to do with the reporting restrictions that were around the case in Australia, whereas I seem to be aware of that information prior to it being released today.
No, it was a suppression order that literally just been lifted today, along with a video of her being interviewed by police during their inquiries. And what has been revealed is suggestions, well, not suggestions, accusations, and what they believe was an attempt to kill him by poisoning him with, in one case, cookies laced with antifreeze and a chicken korma that had possibly rat poison in it, to the point where on one occasion he was so ill he fell into a coma. And his family were at his bedside thinking this is the last time they're going to see him. And this was all several months before the fatal lunch that she invited her in-laws and him to come to have, her beef Wellington with mushrooms inside it. And he said no. And it's suggested that he said no because he thought she's still trying to kill me. So why didn't he tell them? Why didn't he tell his family, don't go?
Because I think I get the impression that she just was very good at creating a narrative that all of this seemed to be accidental. So my sense is that he had suspicions, but not suspicions that were concrete enough to be able to say definitively, because he didn't go to the police about any of the earlier incidents. He just was aware that he had gone for something to eat and that he didn't feel well afterwards. It also goes to show that she used a variety of different methods throughout the time that she was trying to kill him, which again makes her plea of not guilty, and it's all just an accident. A plea, by the way, that many people accepted when it first came to trial, that they thought, yeah, maybe this was just a tragic accident, which is why I was so firm in what I was saying. No, this to me strikes as being guilt. This is somebody who's been trying to kill people. I would also say that given that history, the what we discovered about her work inside the jail. Remember, she was in the kitchens of the prison. I hope she is not in the kitchens any longer, because the kind of behavior that we now are becoming aware of more broadly would not end by her being incarcerated. She would be trying to poison people also whilst she was in jail. So that she better not be working in the kitchens, if you ask me.
So her sentencing is August the 25th. It's down for 2 days because apparently there's going to be lots of impact statements from victims and family. So that story is still to come out. But yeah, quite astonishing when you get cookies laced with antifreeze. And I'm
And the big
honest,
thing
I just thought she was a rubbish cook, but my goodness, she meant it.
And the big thing to watch out for in the sentencing is that Australia can have a whole life tariff. By and large, the whole life tariffs in Australia have been reserved for people who've murdered police officers or others in the course of working for the state. There will be an argument, I think, that she deserves a whole life tariff because of the numbers of people involved, because of the premeditation, because of the painful way in which they died, and also because, of course, she pleaded not guilty throughout, rather than accepting that that's what she had done and shown remorse. So I think that's the big thing to listen out for. Is it going to be a whole life tariff?
And she's 50 now, so the likelihood is she'll die in jail.
Yeah, I would have thought so.
And that brings us on to what we're mainly going to talk about today, which is Suzy Lamplugh, Britain's biggest ever missing persons case. And speaking of dying in jail, the main suspect, who always denied that he was responsible, was a man called John Cannan, who died last November at the age of 70 in Full Sutton prison in East Yorkshire. And it's only just in the past few days or so that the prison, a final report on how he died of a ruptured aneurysm, has come out and said there was no foul play. It was natural causes. And nice for him, he had, David, do not resuscitate. Now, this is a monster. This is a serial rapist, very possibly, and we'll come on to this, a serial killer, all-round dreadful person, although a charmer too. But he's allowed to, quite frankly, decide, the manner of how he wants to slip away peacefully or whatever it may be, while the victims are thinking, hang on, he's taken it to the grave with him. If he did do this, why is he not telling us? But he's gone now, and forever, I suppose, the Suzy Lamplugh mystery will remain.
Yeah, and so there's an element in which that dreadful C word that's used in America, closure. How does Suzy's surviving family find closure? I know Suzy's brother Richard Lamploo, and I knew Suzy's mother Diana Lamploo really well. I think the only thing I remember saying to Richard, and I certainly said to Diana Lamploo, is that it's only in Hollywood that killers want to confess about their misdeeds and give information that might help the family gain closure. That, in my experience, never happens with people who are of the type that John Cannan was. I think John Cannan was a psychopath. That they just take their secrets to the grave. And they take their secrets to the grave because they don't want to be redeemed. They want to remain relevant. They want to remain being talked about. They want immortality. And one of the ways that they can retain a sense that they're being talked about forever and a day is by not revealing something that you and I and others would still like to know, which is what happened to Suzy back in the 1986, and where would our body, what did he do in terms of disposing of our body? So that's why he wouldn't tell, and none of the others tell. Don't expect other people like Cannan to suddenly decide, oh, I'm going to help the families find some form of closure.
And he was something of a mummy's boy. His mother supported him. She visited him in jail, every week, pretty much for his entire time, his entire stretch in jail. And there is a suggestion that he was holding back what he knew until his mother had gone. He didn't want to, stress her out or, make her feel even more embarrassed about, what her son had done. But we don't know to this day whether his mum is still alive or not. And whether or not, again, is that just bravado? Is that just, killer nonsense? Do you actually think he had something there?
Oh, I think he knew what he did. I mean, he's without doubt. Listen, the Metropolitan Police, when it reinvestigated the case in 2002, felt that they knew enough to be able to say they knew that John Cannan had killed Suzy Lamplugh. The CPS said they just didn't have enough evidence to take it to trial. But the guy that led the reinvestigation, a man called Jim Dickey, said he has no doubt that John Cannan was guilty. And by the way, the Lamploo family have no doubt that John Cannan is guilty. The whole stuff about I'm waiting till my mum dies is just a form of fluff or just a form of nonsense. John Cannan previously said, for example, he was in prison. He was in on a sentence because he was found guilty of murdering a woman in Bristol called Shirley Banks. And he said when he was re-interviewed in 2002 about Suzy Lamplugh, he said he knows who killed Suzy Lamplugh because that man also killed Shirley Banks. In other words, he was trying all the time to play games. All the time it was about manipulation and cunningness and conningness. And even the things in the Shirley Banks murder were so resonant of what happens to Suzy, to the extent that he put a false number plate on Shirley Banks's car that he then hides in a garage, and that number plate, off the top of my head, was SLP 386S, Suzy Lamplugh. The three's nothing. 86 was the year that she died. And I remember the reinvestigation, they said to him, what's the significance of the number plate? And he said, oh, some people might interpret it as Suzy Lamplugh. Of course, it was Suzy Lamplugh. He was a real game player to the extent that he even buried poor Shirley Banks's body in Dead Woman's Ditch in the Quantock Hills. He loved that kind of punning, conning, manipulative game that he was smarter than everybody else.
Well, it was July 86, a Monday in July 86, and by all accounts, a lovely day. I mean, as we're recording this in August 2025, I'm just checked. I'm just about 3 miles away from where her estate agent office was, and then not much further on to Shorrells Road, where the house was that she was going to meet Mr. Kipper. But she left the estate agent's office and was never seen again. I mean, there were some sightings, but again, not 100% confirmed. She just disappeared off the face of the earth. And I was just wondering, why would Cannan, why would he come to Fulham? Why would he pick on her? Would he just be waiting outside? Is it opportune, or would he have some sort of other sort of information about it? And as I was going through this, just looking at some of the books that had been written on it, and some of the comments that people write below the book's reviews, there's one from a woman who was in Clapham at the time, and she said, and I've checked her through, and I think she's quite genuine, she's still around. She said, pretty much at the same time, I had my house up for sale in Clapham, and a man came to see it, and I'm sure it was John Cannan, looks exactly like him. He tried to interfere with me, and I shouted and screamed, and a neighbour came, and off he ran. She said, I told the police, and nothing came of it until I think it was the second investigation. Then they did go and speak to her, but she was quite sure that Cannan was the person that did that. Now, was he doing this in terms of he was looking at an easy way to get someone alone by looking at house viewings?
Yeah. And he had a previous history of serial rape in the Midlands area, and that history of rape was also about him going to houses that were up for sale. So there is previous history in relation to his MO about targeting women who might be at home during the day because their house is up for sale. And the reason why the other bit of the story that we haven't told there is that Suzy went to Sharolds Road because a man called Mr. Kipper was wanting to view the house that was up for sale. And we also know it was the first prison I ever worked in, Wormwood Scrubs. And there is a hostel outside the gates of Wormwood Scrubs for prisoners nearing the end of their sentence to work in the community. And Cannan was in that hostel and was working in the Fulham area as a porter. And so he got to know that area as a consequence of his working out, coming towards the end of a sentence for the serial rapes that he had committed. And he had a well-worked routine about presenting himself, very psychopathic, hide in plain sight. He would bring flowers, he'd bring champagne, and he was known as Kipper in the hostel because he used to wear kipper ties, because he would dress up, because he was allowed to go out at night. And he claimed that up to a certain time, there was a curfew after a certain time. But people who knew him at that time in the hostel said that he would frequent wine bars. And it may very well be that he spotted Suzy. It may very well be that he had encountered her whilst he was working out from Wormwood Scrubs' hostel.
When the Crown Prosecution Service says they haven't got enough evidence to get a conviction, I mean, how much evidence would they have had, though?
Well, I think at the time they were reliant on being able to find a body. If you think about 1986, we're at the very early stages of DNA fingerprinting, finding prosecutions based on there being DNA evidence. There's no CCTV to speak of at the time. So as long as he kept denying that he was in a particular area, you're reliant on witness testimony. A number of people said that they saw somebody that resembled John Cannan. There was a very good photo fit at the time that was produced that looks uncannily like John Cannan. But you're back in the day when it's boots on the ground, knocking on doors. Can we prove something? The Lamploos, certainly Suzy's mother, Diana Lamplugh, thought the original police investigation was appalling and said so publicly after a while, which led to there being a very tense relationship between the original police investigation, not so much under the reinvestigation, but the Lamploos weren't at all impressed by what had happened. There does subsequently seem to have been, according to the 2002 cold case review, there does seem to have been some suggestion of there being DNA in a car that Cannan drove that also had DNA of Suzy Lamplugh in that car. But that comes in 2002. Then it's a question of how was that stored? Is that going to be strong enough in terms of beyond reasonable doubt?
And you know more than pretty much anyone in this country, serial killers, MO. Now, he's only been done, or he was only sort of banged up for one murder. If you add in Suzy, that's two. Do you think he could have been a serial killer, or do you think he was a serial killer?
Oh, I think he was a serial killer. And I think that there are a number of unsolved murders that fit uncannily like the MO of John Cannan. And again, he's just fortunate that those murders were committed at a time when the kind of forensic evidence that we would now bring to bear on those cases just didn't exist. The other thing that a lot of people get confused about is that Cannan had much more of a connection to the Midlands and also to the west of England than he did to London. And it's often cold cases in the west of England that I think that one would be able to link Cannan to. Some of the game playing, Martin, Cannan has often said to ex-girlfriends, I remember one woman who was a figure skater. She may have been called Gilly Page. Forgive me if I've got that wrong, but a figure skater, somebody who was well known as a figure skater in for England. But she had met Cannan in Bristol, and she came forward with information about him talking about burying Suzy Lamplugh's body in Worcestershire, Norton Barracks. But again, that's been dug up. There has been no evidence of the body there. There's been no evidence of the body in the mother's back garden. There's been no, it's just impossible. The big thing for me when I looked again at the case, there were some people who had come forward during the original investigation that said they saw John Cannan. I've interviewed these people, and they said they saw John Cannan pushing a suitcase on the day after Suzy Lamplugh was murdered and pushing it into the Grand Union Canal in London. And I did think that should have been taken much more seriously at the time. And of course, it's many years later. But those people were absolutely adamant. We saw John Cannan pushing a suitcase into the canal. And I do wonder if that's what might have happened to poor Suzy.
Of course, remember, though, that he denied it all along. He denied the Shirley Banks murder, and he, to his dying day, denied anything to do with Suzy Lamplugh. Is that the kind of the hallmark of a serial killer? Do they never fess up? Do they not want to be known for these things?
In my experience, serial killers are usually very silent and uncommunicative about the murders they've committed, even though it's been proven that they committed the murders. And those murderers who tend to talk about the murders that they've committed, if they are a serial killer, would include people like Dennis Nielsen. And I was never particularly satisfied that Dennis Nielsen was actually telling me the truth, and often he couldn't remember himself. So by and large, overwhelmingly, serial killers don't talk about the murders they've committed. Again, that's only in Hollywood that they seem to want to do that. And if they do talk, they talk endlessly like Nielsen, and I never felt that I got any information from him that was of any relevance whatsoever.
And does John Cannan have the typical profile of a serial killer? This is a man who claimed abuse at an early age. I think his first brush with the law, with fairly serious offences, at the age of 14. But basically, it's the troubled childhood. Is that the kind of the typical way they come through?
Well, I would have thought, serial killers love telling you about their troubled childhoods. If they do talk about all the things in their past which makes them less responsible. In my view, the thing that was really typifying John Cannan as a serial murderer was that he was psychopathic. He really did just simply lack a conscience. He was also a great risk taker. Some of the things that he did in terms of abducting people in broad daylight, like Suzy. Remember, there were a couple of witnesses that saw the abduction. Some of the risk taking in terms of identifying, going to houses that are for sale, entering the house and hoping to get away with it. And in particular, the serial killer who is able to use a mask of normality as a way of integrating himself and gaining people's trust, integrating himself into a community and gaining people's trust. That would be the hallmark of a serial killer, as opposed to all the kind of triad things, that McDonald triad things that we might want to say about, trauma and childhood, bedwetting, cruelty to animals, fire starting. I tend to accept that those things are real, but I think in Cannan's case and the other serial murderers I've interviewed, I would just be much more conscious of them having a personality disorder.
It is, and it sticks in the craw that, someone who, listen, he's a monster, is allowed to write, do not resuscitate. He's allowed to go out, be snuffed out the way he chooses. And yet Suzy Lamplugh didn't, Shirley Banks didn't, pretty much all the other women that he raped, had no choice in the matter. Nothing about the victims, it's about him. He decides. Again, he has power at the end.
Well, all I can say in terms of that is that if hell exists, it will have a new inmate. I don't think we should ever allow our standards as a civilized community to be reduced to the serial killer, to the murderer's level. I'd also say there's a bigger issue, a real policy issue, that Cannan's silence about where Suzy is, body is, that has cropped up again, which is that in England and Wales we have something called Helens Law, which is named after a young woman called Helen McCourt, who was murdered in 1988 by a man called Ian Sims, and because of the tireless campaign of Marie McCourt, Helen McCourt's mother, we have something in England and Wales called Helen's Law, which is actually the prisoner's disclosure of information about victims. It's more formally known as the Prisoner's Disclosure Information About Victims Act, but we call it Helen's Law. And in this country, it would be virtually impossible. By this country, I mean England and Wales. It would be virtually impossible for someone who's been convicted of murder to gain parole if they weren't prepared to reveal where they had buried the bodies of their victims. Now, in Scotland, this week, Martin, in Scotland, the family of Arlene Fraser, the family of Suzanne Pilley, are trying to get a similar law enacted in Scotland to prevent people who have been convicted of those murders. In Arlene Fraser's case, it's her husband, Nat Fraser. In Suzanne Pilley's case, it's a former colleague called David Gilroy, that they should not be allowed parole. They should not be allowed parole unless they tell where they buried the bodies of Arlene and Suzanne. And I do think it's significant to bring it back to John Cannan. John Cannan was up for parole. He was up for parole in relation to the Shirley Banks murder, got turned down initially, but his parole case would have been considered again. And one of the things that the parole board would have been able to take into account is, we're not prepared to give you parole unless you kind of reveal information about other victims that you are suspected of having been responsible for.
And I would add on to that, you're not going to get parole either if you don't turn up to court to hear the sentencing or to hear the judgment. Quite frankly, it's not good enough. And we know some high-profile cases recently where the accused, convicted, decided they wouldn't go to jail to hear this, which, really upset, again, the victims, the families. And we had that whole debate, well, do you bring them dragging, kicking and screaming into courts? And, the poor prison officers and police have to deal with that. Are they on a video link? What if they just refuse to cooperate at all to hear justice being seen and being done? I'd say, quite frankly, if they don't want to come and do that, then they're in the same category as, who not telling me where the body's been buried. You just do not, you lose all kind of privileges, and that includes early parole or hearing about parole.
Well, again, I tend to be on the side different to yourself. I tend to be aware, having been in court on a number of occasions in the course of my work. If you get some of these guys who are going to be dragged kicking and screaming to court to hear sentence being passed on them, they will spit, they will shout, they will defecate, they will urinate, they will masturbate, they will behave in a way in which the dignity of the people in court to hear the sentence being passed, which will include the families of the victims, it's just a circus. It will be reduced to a circus.
And then you lose parole as well. Then fine, if you don't come and be respectful to the court, to the judge and to the families, especially if you're about to be found guilty, then that also includes you lose your rights to parole.
Oh, forgive me, I missed that part of your argument.
I didn't put that in. I didn't put that. I'm just saying, A, you've got to be there, and B, you've got to be respectful.
Well, then I think that is about legislative change, and let's see if maybe there will be anybody that's prepared to pick up that particular argument. I mean, Marie McCourt is a force of nature. I mean, I've heard her speak on a number of occasions, and it took ages for her to get Helens Law passed. And irony of irony, Helen's murderer, Ian Sims, was released in the February of 2022 before Helen's Law becomes law in November 2022. I'm all for the court process to be one in which there is justice being shown. And can I also say, when we're talking about that, we mustn't ignore how powerful the victim impact statement is by family members about what has happened. And I saw that again because, of course, we televise. And that would be the other thing. I'm really pro televising court cases. I really am, as exists in many states of the United States. But I don't know if you listen to some of the families talking in the case of the Idaho trial. I just found what those families were saying was so utterly moving that suddenly you felt, yeah, this is good that families are able to share those kinds of things in front of an impassive man that had been accepted a plea deal and found guilty of murder.
And speaking of strong mothers, let's not forget Diana Lamplugh and what the Lamploo Trust has gone on to do in Suzy's name, which is quite fantastic, really.
Oh, and it was one of my abiding joys to know her. And can I tell one anecdote about Diana? I was doing, as you know, I do a lot of sixth form conferences for A-level students, and I was on the same platform as Diana. And Diana, so we're 1,000 students in the hall, and Diana had all the female students in the audience. She said, she had a very middle class cut glass accent, and she said, I want all the girls in the auditorium to stand up. And so all the girls stand up in the auditorium, and she says, okay, now I want you to scream. And there was a kind of polite titter of laughter, and then a few people screamed, a few of the girls screamed. And she went, no, 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 no. I want you to scream. And then this time, the roof of the auditorium was taken off by, 17, 18-year-old girls screaming. And then there was silence. And she said, if my Suzy had screamed, she might still be alive. I want you to be alive too. And I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, that was so powerful and had such a meaning. And she worked tirelessly. And her husband, Paul, they worked tirelessly about the safety of women, especially women in the course of performing their profession. And all credit to her. Every time we talk about Suzy Lamplugh, I think about Diana, a wonderful, wonderful woman.
And she's made sure she's gone. She's left us now, sadly, as has her husband. But she's made sure that Suzy's name lives on, which must be the most wonderful tribute that you could possibly, as a mother, leave for your daughter. And good for her. And I'm sure she's helped many, many women, who've taken the advice. And we're not talking about them, thank God, because they've done exactly what the Lamploo Trust told them to do.
Thank you for saying that. And also, I think it's one of the examples I use about a family themselves finding closure. They might never have been able to get closure in terms of where Suzy's body might have been left, but they got closure in terms of, as soon as they could, after 7 years, she was declared dead and legally. And they also were happy to state publicly at all time, oh no, we know who murdered Suzy Lamplugh. Who murdered Suzy Lamplugh was a man in prison called John Cannan. So they found closure by reclaiming the narrative and the process for themselves. And guess what, Martin? I know John Cannan wanted to meet with Diana Lamplugh because he wanted to play games. And thank heavens she was strong enough to say, no, I don't need to meet with him.
And just finally, David, will the police still have that open? I mean, will it still be considered active because they haven't got a body? and he's gone and no one's told them, who did it or I did it. So is it still something that's, in a file somewhere that can be pulled out?
Yeah, it's still in the file. I kind of, as you know, I'm completely skeptical about all of this, though. The police narrative is always no case is closed. If new information comes, all that kind of stuff. I just don't buy it. Cold cases for me, the cold case review team for me, I'm afraid, is usually two retired detectives who are re-employed as civilians sitting in a cupboard in an annex somewhere going Googling. Often they're Googling cold cases to see what information exists. I don't buy the narrative. Nobody's going to look at Suzy Lamplug's case again unless new information comes forward that will allow a charge to be brought in even now. And that's not going to happen.
The mystery of Suzy Lamplugh still goes on. David, thank you so much today. Next time with a bit more growth, you're growing it back, are you?
It's I'm not filming for at least 3 weeks, and so I'm kind of hoping this is going to be a bit more hair by the time somebody sees me on the telly again. But I just don't like this. I find it really exposing. But hey, you've not had a beard. Have you ever had a beard?
No, because when I did not shave for a bit, I think it goes ginger, or now it just goes grey. So no, I'm still living my life as a 35-year-old.
You've got lovely hair. It's nice and flowing. The locks are beautiful. Oh, look at mine. I've lost all of mine.
That's too kind of you. I think you look great like that anyway. Listen, thank you so much. And thank you for watching us. Please drop us a line through the usual channels on all platforms it gets to us. And again, we're taking adverts now. Sorry about that, but it does pay for, the little bit of microphone, headphone things that we've got here. Until the next time, David, thank you and goodbye, everybody.
Take care. Bye.